June 15, 2002, Papavero Funeral Home, Maspeth, Queens. 100 cars, nearly 24 flower cars behind the hearse carrying arrangements built into shapes, a cigar, a royal flush, a martini glass with olives in it, helicopters over the procession, 300 people waiting at the cemetery gate, and no priest. The Diocese of Brooklyn had refused the family a funeral mass. One sentence from the chancellor: there could be a mass for the dead sometime after the burial, not with the body in the church. So the most photographed gangster in American history was buried out of a chapel with flowers shaped like a card game. And the woman in the lead car was his wife of 40 years. America looked at that and decided it knew what it was seeing. The loyal one. The last real mob wife in New York. Stood by her man from a Brooklyn barroom in 1958 to a prison hospital in Missouri in 2002 and never said a word against him. That's the picture. It is not the marriage. 3 things about that woman, and I'll prove all 3. 1. The FBI's own file on her husband says she had been married before and had a child before John Gotti ever met her. In more than 60 years, through 5 children, 4 trials, and 4 decades of headlines, she has never once addressed it. Her own history is the only part of this story nobody has ever printed. 2. In the spring of 1980, she took a metal baseball bat to the man who killed her 12-year-old son. 2 months later, that man vanished off a Long Island street. And she, weeks into the worst grief of her life, was the one sitting in a room answering questions from homicide detectives. 3. In 1999, in a visiting room in the most restrictive federal prison in America, she gave the boss of the Gambino crime family an ultimatum, and he folded. It's the only fight in this entire marriage that she is documented to have won. Every word of that conversation was recorded by the United States government. Hold on to that. It's the whole ending. It started in a bar in Brooklyn in 1958. But go back before the bar, because the version of this story that gets told, the neighborhood girl who fell for the neighborhood tough guy, flattens the one detail that explains everything she did for the next 6 decades. Victoria Giorgio was born in Brooklyn on December 5, 1942. Her father was Italian. Her mother was of Italian and Russian Jewish descent. Her parents separated when she was very young, most accounts say around the age of 2, and she was raised between Brooklyn and Queens by her mother. Read that again, because in the world she was about to marry into, it matters more than it sounds. She was not Sicilian. She was not from a family in the life. She had no uncle at the club, no cousin who could vouch for her, no surname that opened a door in Ozone Park. She came from a broken household in a culture that did not have broken households. Officially, whatever standing she was ever going to have, she was going to have to be given by someone else. And then there is the paperwork. According to FBI documents, DiGiorgio had been married previously and had 1 child by that marriage before she met Gotti. That's the Bureau's characterization, in a Bureau file, about a woman who has never given a sit-down interview in her life. She has never confirmed it. She has never denied it. She has never been asked in a setting where she had to answer. I'm not going to pretend to know what that file gets right. Federal agents writing background on a hijacker's wife in the 1960s were not fact-checkers. What I can tell you is the shape of it. The first documented fact about Victoria DiGiorgio's life comes from a government file about her husband, not from her. That is how the entire record works from here on. Now, the other side of the table. In 1958, John Gotti was 17 or 18 years old, the 5th of 13 children, a high school dropout running with the Fulton Rockaway Boys. Not a gangster yet, a kid with a nickname. And here is the part of his childhood that you need, because it is the master key to this marriage. His mother's name was Fanny. His daughter, in her 2009 memoir, describes what happened to her. The years of fighting, the sickness that ran through the marriage, the husband taking off for the last time, and Fanny withdrawing into herself until she was admitted to a local hospital and placed in what the family was told was the hardship ward. No relative would take financial responsibility for the children, so the children were split up and scattered. John and his older brother Pete drew the worst of it and were dropped at the Brooklyn home for boys, not knowing whether their mother was ever coming back. That's his daughter's telling. In a book written to defend the family, so understand it's the kindest available version. Set that hospital down somewhere. We're going to need it in 1998, because the lesson available in that house was not cruelty in the shouting sense. The lesson was this: a woman's collapse is a logistics problem. The logistics get solved by whoever has money, and nobody in the family ever discusses it again. He learned that at 12. He would still be applying it at 58. They married on March 6, 1962. Sources cannot agree on how old she was. You'll see 16. You'll see 17. You'll see 20. The arithmetic from her own birth date says 19, and it says something else too. Their first daughter, Angel, had been born in the spring of 1961. She was already a mother when she walked down the aisle, 18 years old with a baby, marrying a 21-year-old with a juvenile record. That's not a wedding. That's a decision made under pressure by two kids. And for a few months, he actually tried. This is in the record, and it's worth pausing on, because it is the last time it happens. In 1962, John Gotti took legitimate work, a presser in a coat factory, and an assistant to a truck driver. Honest, dull, badly paid work. By 1966, he had been jailed twice. Now let's do the arithmetic on this marriage, because the arithmetic is the part nobody puts in the documentaries. May 1969. He goes into the United States Penitentiary at Lewisburg on a federal hijacking plea. He comes out in January 1972, roughly 32 months. August 1975. After pleading to attempted manslaughter in the killing of James McBratney, he goes into Green Haven. He's paroled in July 1977. Call it 23 months. December 11th, 1990. He's arrested at the Ravenite Social Club and held without bail. He never comes home again. 11 and a half years, added up. Of the 40 years of this marriage, her husband spent somewhere in the region of 16 years in state or federal custody. I'll call that approximate, because the short stretches in the 60s are documented loosely. But the direction is not in dispute. For roughly 2/5 of her married life, the man was not in the house because the government would not let him be. And here is the detail that makes even the prison time asymmetrical. The standard account of the Green Haven stretch, the version that reaches the encyclopedias, is that Gotti apparently bribed officials and guards and was allowed to leave the facility to meet mobsters at Manhattan restaurants and even to visit his home in Howard Beach, so he could buy his way out of prison for dinner. She could not buy her way out of anything. Then there were the years he was technically free. After July 1977, he was made, and he was installed at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, a storefront registered as a non-profit, which is one of the great documents in American organized crime, and which functioned as the place where John Gotti actually lived. Card games, coffee, sit-downs, men waiting on the sidewalk for a word. He came home at hours the accounts of that period describe as closer to dawn than to dinner. His daughter's memoir puts a hard object next to all of this. At one point in those early years, the family bought groceries with a book of food stamps. Hold that against the image, because the image is Dapper Don, the $1,800 suits, the pinky ring, the barbershop hair. That John Gotti is a creation of the mid-1980s. The John Gotti of this marriage's first 2 decades was a man who left his wife with small children, a food stamp book, and a court calendar. She did not run a household. She ran an absence. By the end of the 70s, the money had arrived. The family was in a modest tri-level house on 85th Street in Howard Beach. And I want to stress modest, because this is the second myth this story needs killed. There was no compound, no mansion. The most feared crime family in New York was headquartered, domestically, in a middle-class house in Queens where the wife of a capo cooked for the neighborhood on Christmas Eve. 5 children, Angel, born 1961. Victoria, 1962. John Jr., 1964. Frank, 1967 or 1968. Sources vary. Peter, 1974. On the afternoon of March 18, 1980, 12-year-old Frank Gotti borrowed a friend's motorized minibike. The friend hadn't finished explaining how to work it. Frank pulled out into the street from behind a dumpster at a blind spot and was hit by a car driven by John Favara, the family's backyard neighbor, a service manager at a furniture company coming home from work. Favara told police the son had blinded him and he never saw the boy. Now, here is the myth, and it is in nearly every telling of this story, including ones that ought to know better, that Frank Gotti was killed by a drunk driver. The police investigation ruled the death an accident. No criminal charges were ever filed against John Favara. Eyewitness accounts and the department's own reconstruction put the cause on a child entering the road at a blind spot on a machine he'd been handed 30 seconds earlier. The drunkenness claim traces to the family. Frank's mother said it at the time, and it has been repeated for 45 years by people who never checked the file. Correcting that matters, and not because it makes anybody look better. It matters because the true version is worse. The true version is that there was nobody to blame, and this was a family with no available response to a thing that could not be avenged. What happened next is documented in outline and disputed in detail. Favara's car was stolen and returned with the word murderer on it. Death threats, notes, neighbors telling him to get out of Howard Beach. And on May 28, 1980, when Favara came to the Gotti house to apologize, Victoria Gotti met him with a metal baseball bat and swung it at him. Multiple accounts, including the standard biographies, agree on the bat. They vary on whether she connected. Favara declined to press charges and put his house up for sale. The closing was set for July 31st. On July 25th, the Gotti family left for Florida. On July 28th, 3 days later, John Favara was seized outside his workplace in New Hyde Park and forced into a van. Witnesses described a beating with a bat or a silenced .22 or both. He was never seen again. He was declared legally dead 3 years later. Court papers filed in Brooklyn Federal Court in January 2009 alleged that a Gambino hitman killed him and dissolved the body in acid. That's an allegation from a prosecution filing, so weigh it as such. The body has never been found. When the Gottis got back on August 4th, they gave police hotel receipts proving they were in Florida. No arrests were ever made. Here is where this marriage shows you what it actually was. That trip to Florida was, by every account, a grieving family getting away from the street where their child died. And it was, simultaneously, the alibi. Both things are true at the same time. That's not a contradiction. That's the system his mother's hospital ward taught him. A crisis is a logistics problem. You solve it with money, contacts, and speed. Nobody processes the emotional content because processing it produces nothing. Except this time the crisis was her son, and the logistics required her to be somewhere specific on a specific date. Her mourning was scheduled. Her whereabouts during the worst summer of her life became a document that a police department kept in a file, and then she had to sit and answer questions. The line she gave has been quoted for 4 decades, and it is the coldest sentence in this story. Asked about Favara's disappearance, she said she didn't know what happened to him, but she wasn't sorry if something did, and then she itemized it. He never sent her a card. He never apologized. He never even got his car fixed. Her husband's version, to detectives, was shorter. He said he wasn't sorry the guy was missing and wouldn't be sorry if he turned up dead. Read her sentence again, though, because it isn't his sentence. His is a boss performing for cops. Hers is an accounting, a card, an apology, a repaired fender. Those are the things a normal person expects from a neighbor after a catastrophe, and she is standing in the ruins listing what she never got. That's a woman who had been taught by then to convert grief into a grievance she could say out loud, because the grief itself was evidence. and the bat comes back. Because according to testimony a Gambino associate gave in court decades later in 1979, the year before Frank died, John Gotti had a young man named Carmine Agnello ambushed for assaulting his daughter Victoria, beaten with a baseball bat, then shot in the buttocks. That's a cooperating witness's account, given in 2007 by a man trading information for consideration, so hold it exactly that loosely. Because here's what isn't disputed. In 1984, Victoria Gotti married Carmine Agnello against both her parents' wishes. Whatever the parents wanted in that house, the daughters married into the same world anyway. That is what it looks like when a mother has no authority to transmit. Now the part everybody asks about, and I want to handle it the way the record actually supports, because most tellings get this backwards. There is a persistent, decades-old body of reporting that John Gotti kept a long-term mistress, Shannon Grillo, known to reporters as Sandy, and by her mother's name, Connolly, the estranged wife of a Gambino associate, Ernest Grillo, and the daughter of Rosemary Connolly, long identified as the companion of Gotti's own mentor, Agnello della Croce. Jerry Capesci and Jean Mustaine identified her as Gotti's girlfriend in their 1996 book. In 2006, when reporters camped outside her Staten Island house, she said Gotti had never been anything more than a friend and asked to be left alone. There is a widely repeated account that in June of 1986, while under indictment, Gotti had a physician come to a Manhattan hotel where he was staying with her. That one travels through mob beat reporting rather than any court record, so hold it loosely too. Here's one that isn't loose at all, because it's fixed to a date the FBI chose. On the evening of December 11, 1990, federal agents and NYPD detectives stormed the Ravenite Social Club and arrested John Gotti, Sammy Gravano, and Frank Locascio. He was held without bail. He would die in custody. The following night, according to the reporting on that arrest, he had planned to take a woman named Lisa Gastineau, then the estranged wife of a Jets defensive lineman, to Frank Sinatra's 75th birthday concert at the Meadowlands. It was a birthday present. Her birthday was December 11th. So the last night of John Gotti's free life, the night before the arrest that ended his marriage in every practical sense, he was planning to spend with somebody else. And then 2005. In open court, at his son's racketeering trial, a Gambino cooperator testified that Gotti had kept a Staten Island mistress who bore him a child. A cooperating witness with every incentive in the world, so label it what it is. Testimony from a man trading information for a sentence, never independently proven, and denied by the woman named in the coverage that followed. But understand what that meant in the room. Victoria Gotti's children were sitting in that courtroom. Her daughter had reporters outside her house within the week. Whatever the truth of it, her husband's private life was now something her family learned about from a witness stand 3 years after he was in the ground. Here is what I can't tell you, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There is no interview, no letter, no diary, no confidant on the record explaining what Victoria DiGiorgio Gotti thought about any of it. Not one page. The whole subject exists only in the mouths of informants, reporters, and other men's books. But we do have one sentence from her about it, and it is the single most revealing thing she has ever said in public. And it isn't about the women at all. Somewhere in the late 1980s, John Gotti brought their eldest son into the Gambino crime family. He did it without telling her. By then, Gotti was the most famous criminal in America. He had ordered the killing of his own boss, Paul Castellano, outside Sparks Steakhouse in December 1985, and taken the family. He had beaten 3 prosecutions, and the press had crowned him the Teflon Don. In the reporting of those years, he's a celebrity. Marlon Brando invited over to his table, crowds outside the courthouse, the barber, the ties, the swagger. And his wife, who had raised 5 children through roughly 16 years of his incarceration, found out that the son named after him had been made. Years later, she described it to the Daily News. "It broke her heart," she said. "She felt betrayed, the worst betrayal." And then the line that reframes this entire marriage. She said she would rather have dealt with other women. Sit with that. Not, "He was unfaithful and it destroyed me." Not, "The women were the wound." The women, in her own accounting, were the lesser injury. The thing she could not forgive was that the man had reached across her and taken the child. That is the cruelty at the center of this story, and it's worse than any mistress, because it's structural. She had absorbed decades of absence on the theory that the absence was the price of the household. Then the household got requisitioned, too. And then he lost. November 8th, 1991. Sammy Gravano fires his lawyer and signs on with the government after hearing his own boss run him down on tape. The tapes came from a bug the FBI had planted in the autumn of 1989 in an apartment above the Ravenite, the living room of Nettie Cirelli, the elderly widow of the club's caretaker. Gotti assumed the club itself was wired, so he went upstairs to talk. He was recorded in another old woman's front room, and it finished him. April 2nd, 1992. Convicted on all counts. 5 murders, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, gambling, loan sharking. June 23rd, life without parole. Within 24 hours of sentencing, he was on a plane to the United States Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois. At that time, the most restrictive federal prison in the country, and a facility Amnesty International had condemned as inhumane. The terms of the marriage from that day forward were set by the Bureau of Prisons. An 8x7 cell, underground. 22 to 23 hours a day inside it. Food through a slot in the door. No chair. He folded his mattress into an L against the wall so he'd have something to sit on. Showers taken in shackles, inside a movable cage. 5 visiting periods a month from an approved list. 3 phone calls a month, and by some accounts, at some points, as few as 1 every 90 days. Do the math on that. 5 visits a month, most of which went to lawyers and to his son, who was carrying his orders out of that prison as acting boss. Whatever remained was the marriage. 1,200 miles from Howard Beach, on a government schedule, in a room with a camera and a recorder. She was 49 when that started. She was 59 when it ended, and now the one fight she won. By the late 90s, John Jr. was facing federal racketeering charges and wanted out. He wanted to take a plea, do the time and walk away from the life. He went to his father to ask permission. His father said no, repeatedly. In a series of visiting room sit-downs, a dying man in a khaki prison uniform refused to release his son from an organization that had already consumed 35 years of that family's life. Then, according to the account his daughter gave CBS News, his wife came to Illinois. Her daughter's telling is blunt. Mom goes to see Dad, and Mom threatens Dad. Either you release him, or I'll never speak to you again. I won't be here anymore. You'll never see me in your life again. He relented. That is, as far as the public record goes, the only time in 40 years that Victoria Gotti issued a demand to her husband and got it. And look at what she had to spend to win it. The only leverage she possessed at the very end was her own presence. The last thing she still owned, and the last thing he still wanted. She threatened to withhold herself from a man in an underground cell. That worked. Nothing else ever had. And here is the fact that makes this whole story what it is. Those visits were recorded. We know because of what came out of them. On one of her visits to Marion, his daughter Victoria sat through a taped session in which Gotti asked about her husband, Carmine Agnello, whether the man gets into the back seat of a car and thinks somebody's stolen the steering wheel. That's a joke. It survives because a federal recording device was running in the room while a man insulted his son-in-law to his daughter's face. So think about what that means for the mother. The single most consequential conversation of her married life, the moment she pulled her son out of the family business, happened in a room the United States government was listening to. Whatever she actually said to him, in whatever words was captured, transcribed, and filed by strangers. Her marriage's decisive scene exists. It just doesn't belong to her. In 1998, he was diagnosed with cancer of the head and neck. Surgery, radiation, remission, and then in 2000 it came back. He was moved to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He died there on June 10, 2002, at 61. Now go back and pick up the hospital I asked you to set down. Fanny Gotti had gone into a hardship ward and her children had been scattered because nobody would take responsibility for them. Roughly 6 decades later, her son died in a prison hospital while his own family was scattered by federal prosecution. 2 brothers in custody, his son in custody, his former son-in-law in custody, another brother and a nephew under indictment. Not one of them could attend the funeral. His daughter has described what the visits were like at the end. "You can't be there," she said. "You can't touch him. You're watching through glass." That's the daughter's account of it, not the wife's. The wife has never described it. That's not a contradiction either. That's the same system, 1 generation on. A woman disappears into a hospital. The family cannot be present for what money cannot fix, and nobody discusses it afterward. He was raised inside that machine and he ran it for 40 years, and it processed him last. And they wouldn't even give her a mass. The same church that had raised no public protest over Carlo Gambino's funeral in 1976 refused a funeral mass for John Gotti in 2002. 1 sentence from the Brooklyn chancellor, a mass for the dead sometime after the burial. So she buried her husband out of a funeral home in Maspeth with flower cars and put him in the family mausoleum at St. John's Cemetery in the vault that already held their 12-year-old son. She had been signing for both of them for 22 years. And here's what almost nobody noticed, because they were too busy pitying her. Look at what everybody else in this family did after 2002. Her daughter Victoria wrote a best-selling memoir, starred in a reality series, and in 2019 co-wrote, executive produced and narrated a television film about her own life. Her son John Jr. wrote a book about his father, sat for interviews, went on television. Cooperating witnesses sold their versions from witness stands. Capesci and Mustaine, Gravano, the prosecutors, the agents, everybody with a stake published. Victoria Gotti has never written a page, no memoir, no sit-down interview, no documentary of her own. In more than 60 years of the most heavily covered organized crime story in American history, her total on-the-record output amounts to a handful of sentences to reporters and a few minutes of shouting in a courtroom. And yet, in 2009, at her son's murder and racketeering trial, she stood up in a federal courtroom in Manhattan and interrupted the proceedings. She asked the judge if she could speak. He asked whether she was a party to the case. She said she wasn't, but that she was his mother. He told her she couldn't speak. She said it anyway. Asked him what he thought about perjury. Told him they were trying to kill her son before he ever got to trial, and shouted that they should just hang him now. Outside, she handed reporters copies of a polygraph her daughter had taken to rebut a cooperator's claim about her. The trial, she told them, was rigged before her son set foot in it. That is not a bewildered widow. That's a woman who understood exactly what a courtroom is, a place where other people's versions become permanent, and who walked into it carrying counter-documentation. And then John Travolta drove to her house. He was preparing to play her husband. He arrived at the Gotti home, was met with handshakes and hugs, brought her a gift bag, and stayed more than 2 hours. The reporting at the time was explicit about the purpose. The meeting was to get Victoria Gotti's blessing for the film. His wife, Kelly Preston, was cast to play her. Preston described the access afterward. They spoke to Victoria, she made them lunch, and they asked her questions. Read that scene again, because it's the payoff to everything in this story. The definitive Hollywood account of John Gotti, the one that put his face on a poster, required an elderly woman in Queens to say yes. And she said yes over lunch, at her own kitchen table, on her own terms, without writing a single word down. She had spent 40 years watching every private thing she owned get converted into somebody else's file. The bat swing became a police report. The Florida trip became an alibi. The visiting room became a transcript. Her first marriage became a line in an FBI document. Her grief became a motive, so she stopped producing material entirely. And the only power left to a person in that position is the power to withhold consent, which is precisely the power she exercised on her husband in that prison in 1999, and precisely the power she was exercising in her kitchen years later. By the most recent reporting available, she is still living in her 80s, out of public view. That reporting indicates at least 3 strokes since 2006, including a serious one in 2013 and surgery in 2006 to address the source of one of them. She was still in Howard Beach as of 2013. Where she is now isn't publicly established, and I'm not going to guess. She has not given an interview. So go back to the flower cars. June 2002, Maspeth, Queens. The cigar, the royal flush, the martini glass with the olives, 100 cars and 300 people at the cemetery gate and helicopters overhead, and a church that wouldn't open its doors. For more than 20 years, America has read that procession as devotion. The loyal wife burying the love of her life, faithful to the end. Now look at what she was actually burying. 19 years old with a baby at the altar in 1962. A husband who tried honest work for a few months and never again. Roughly 16 of 40 years spent with him in custody, including a stretch of the 70s where he could reportedly bribe his way out of a state prison for dinner while she couldn't get out of the house. A 12-year-old son under a neighbor's car in March 1980, a bat in her hands in May, and detectives across a table in August. A mistress at the Ravenite, a concert ticket bought for another woman's birthday, a cooperator on a witness stand telling her children about a child they'd never heard of, a son taken into the business behind her back, the one betrayal she actually named. And it wasn't a woman. 1,200 miles, 5 visits a month, 3 phone calls, and a recording device in the room, and not one page of it in her own hand. The only complete record of Victoria DiGiorgio's 40-year marriage was compiled by the men who were listening to it. Agents, informants, prosecutors, reporters, and eventually her own children. She is the last person alive who could tell it properly. She has never once tried. That isn't grief, and it isn't loyalty, and it isn't fear. After 4 decades of watching everything she said out loud turn into somebody's exhibit, silence was the only thing left she could actually own. They took the marriage. They took the son. They took the tapes. The silence is hers.